They laughed when I walked in. Not a quiet chuckle, not a curious glance. Full-on, shoulder-slapping, desk-thumping laughter. "Yo, Holloway's trying out for Saving Private Ryan," someone called from the back. "Cosplay veteran reporting for duty," another yelled, saluting with a juice box. I didn't respond, just kept walking. Hat pulled low, boots dragging across the tile. Then the door opened again, and Principal Reynolds walked in, eyes serious, voice steady. He placed one hand over his chest and said, "Students, I'd like to ask for 30 seconds of silence. To honor Sergeant James Holloway, who wore that very hat in the Ia Drang Valley in 1965. The room froze. No more laughter, no more jokes. Just 30 seconds of silence for the man whose name they never knew until now. It had started that morning, same as any other. Cold, gray, Veterans Day. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the old hat in my hands. Faded olive green, canvas soft from decades of sweat and sun. The air cavalry pin was still clipped to the side, barely hanging on. It still smelled like Grandpa. Pipe tobacco, dust, a trace of gasoline from his garage. I hadn't worn it since the funeral. But today wasn't about funerals. Today was about remembering. I tucked it into my backpack at first. Thought maybe I'd just hold it for a while, show it to Mr. Ellison in history class. He was the only one who ever really talked about the war, like it mattered. But something shifted on the bus. Maybe it was the kids in the back yelling over rap songs. Maybe it was the couple in front of me joking about how no one under 70 cares about Veterans Day. I reached into my bag, and I put the hat on. Pulled it snug, bent the brim just a little like Grandpa used to. I walked into school through the side entrance, head down. It wasn't a big school, just under 400 kids, which made everything feel smaller and louder than it should have. My locker was on the second floor near the science wing. I kept my head low, hoping no one would say anything. But of course they did. "Did you get that from Goodwill? Is there a war reenactment club I missed?" Dudes ready to storm the cafeteria. I bit my tongue, kept my hands in my pockets. Told myself I didn't care. But I did. The worst part wasn't the jokes. It was the tone. They didn't just mock the hat, they mocked the idea that it meant something. Mocked the possibility that a piece of fabric could still carry weight. They didn't know my grandfather wore this into battle, that he saw friends fall next to him in the jungle, that he kept this hat and only this hat after everything else from Vietnam burned in a garage fire years ago. They didn't know that when he died last fall, he left it to me, not in a will. In a whisper. The last time I saw him, he was sitting on the porch in that beat-up lawn chair, eyes closed against the sun. He didn't talk much near the end. But that day, as I stood to leave, he motioned me over. Pulled the hat from his lap. Pressed it into my hands. Said, "Don't wear this for show. Wear it when it matters." I nodded. Didn't cry. Didn't ask questions. Just took it. And kept it hidden in the top of my closet for nearly a year. Until today. By third period, I had started to regret it. Every hallway I walked down felt narrower. Every voice behind me felt sharper. Even my friends avoided eye contact. One of them, Derek, leaned over during English and muttered, "Maybe lose the hat, man. You're kind of making a scene." I turned toward him slowly, and then looked away. I wasn't mad, he just didn't understand. Not yet. By the time I reached fourth period U.S. history with Mr. Ellison, I was ready to shove the hat back in my bag and forget the whole thing. I stood outside the classroom door, hand hovering over the brim. Just then it opened. Mr. Ellison looked at me, then at the hat. He didn't smile, didn't laugh. He just stepped aside and said, "Come on in." I walked in, every eye on me. And then they laughed. Not all of them, but enough. A burst of snickering near the windows, a few whispers near the back. One kid made a clicking noise like a camera. Smile, Sergeant Grandpa. And I stood there, hat still on, eyes fixed on the floor, thinking, maybe this was a mistake. And then the door opened again, and everything changed. Grandpa didn't tell war stories. Not like the movies. He never sat me down with whiskey and gravel in his voice and said back in Nam. He just lived like someone who'd already said everything worth saying. But just once, he broke that rule. It was 2 summers ago. We were raking leaves together out in his backyard. He wore a flannel shirt even though it was 80 degrees, and the hat, of course, always the hat. I asked if he wanted to take a break, but he just pointed to the edge of the yard. "That maple there," he said. "Planted it the year I got back. Didn't think it'd live." He leaned on the rake, breathing heavy sweat on his forehead. Then he looked down at me and said, "Ia Drang wasn't supposed to happen like that." Just like that, no warning. My chest got tight. I didn't speak. I knew better. "I was 19, he said, 3rd of the 7th Cavalry. We landed in a clearing and thought we were ahead of them. But they were already there, all around us." He paused, eyes far away. "Lost my best friend in the first hour, Doc Lane. We called him Patches. Used to sneak candy into our ammo pouches." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. He looked at me like he was seeing 2 timelines at once. Then he tapped the brim of his hat. "Only thing I kept." That was all he said. He turned back to the rake, wiped his face, and we finished the yard in silence. But I never forgot, because that was the only time I ever saw his voice shake. After he passed, the family gathered in a quiet cemetery just outside of town. Military rites, flag folding, bugle, the works, but no big speeches. That wasn't him. He'd left instructions, no open casket, no slideshow, no greatest generation nonsense. "Just let him play taps and go home," he wrote. So we did. But afterward, my mom gave me the hat, said Grandpa wanted me to have it. I didn't understand why. I wasn't a soldier, wasn't even a Boy Scout, just a kid who liked old maps and war documentaries. But she said, "He saw something in you," said you'd know when to wear it. That's what I thought about when I stood in the hallway outside U.S. history. Me holding the hat in my hands, wondering if I was wrong. Wondering if the smirks and jokes were proof I wasn't strong enough to carry it. And then the door opened, and Mr. Ellison stood there. He looked at the hat, then looked me in the eye and said, "Come on in." No questions, no comments, just recognition. I stepped inside, heart thudding in my ears. The room went quiet for a second. Then came the first laugh, then the second. A whisper. "Dude thinks it's platoon in here." Someone behind me made a trumpet noise, a mock bugle. And just like that, the heat came rushing into my face. I felt my grip tighten on the brim. Every instinct told me to take it off. To slide into my seat, pretend it never happened. To fold. But then I remembered something. A moment I hadn't thought of in months. It was raining that day. Hard. I'd come to visit Grandpa unannounced. I'd just had a fight with my dad about something stupid, I don't even remember what. I showed up soaked, shaking 17 and angry at the world. He opened the door, took one look at me and said, "Sit down. Dry off. You're not the first Holloway to walk through a storm." Then he pulled the hat from the hook near the door, held it for a moment, and handed it to me. "You can't stop the storm," he said, "but you can stand in it." So I stood there in class and I didn't sit down. Didn't speak. Didn't laugh. Just stood, hat still on, until the room quieted on its own. And then, from the back of the room, a door creaked open again. Principal Reynolds. Now, our principal wasn't the sentimental type. He didn't do big emotional gestures. But that morning he walked in like someone on a mission. He looked around the room at the Snickers, at the phone still half raised at me. And then he said it. Clear, calm, no notes. "Students." He began placing a hand over his heart. "I'd like to ask for 30 seconds of silence to honor Sergeant James Holloway, who wore that very hat in the Ia Drang Valley in 1965. The room fell still. No more jokes, no more memes. Just quiet. And me standing there holding the brim of a hat that suddenly felt right. Like it belonged. Like maybe I did too. The thing about silence is, it doesn't last. Not in high school. Not in hallways that echo with sneakers and sarcasm. So even after the principal walked out, and even after the 30 seconds of silence passed, reality came rushing back. And it rushed in loud. It started during lunch. I sat in my usual spot, second table from the wall, 3 seats from the end. Close enough to hear the noise, far enough to pretend I didn't care. The hat was still on my head. Still low. Still personal. That's when Troy and his crew walked by. Troy, the kind of guy who could bench press a vending machine and still find time to fail algebra. He spotted me, slowed down, and made a face. Oh, look, Private Holloway survived the jungle. Laughter. Quick, loud, performed. I didn't look up. He leaned closer, hovering over the table. Tell me something, man. Is that hat standard issue TikTok filter? More laughter? I tightened my jaw. Then came the photo. Someone from their table took a picture when I turned my head, caught me mid-chew, hat slightly tilted. Within minutes, it was on Snap. Caption, veteran vibes, boomer drip. It got over 40 reactions in under an hour. My phone buzzed constantly in my backpack. I didn't check it. I didn't want to see what they said. But I already knew. Even people I thought were friends stayed quiet. Lexi, who once walked out of English class with me just to rant about The Great Gatsby, passed me in the hall and looked away. Ben from math waved awkwardly, but didn't stop to talk. I started to feel like an antique on display. Something borrowed. Something weird. Something not meant for this place. At the end of 5th period, I sat in the bathroom stall with my hands folded in my lap. The hat sat on my knee. For the first time that day, I almost folded it up and put it away. Not because I didn't care, but because I was tired. Tired of being stared at like a glitch in the system. Tired of defending something no one else understood. Then I remembered the story Mom told me after Grandpa's funeral. She said when he came back from Vietnam, people didn't clap. Didn't salute. They turned their heads. Crossed the street. Whispered. She told me he once walked through the airport in full uniform and someone spat at his boots. I asked her what he did. She said he didn't stop walking. That's when I knew. The hat wasn't just cloth and sweat and dust. It was defiance. Quiet, steady, dignified. And if he could wear it in the middle of a world that didn't want to see him, then I could wear it through one cafeteria. Still, it hurt. Not the jokes. I could tune those out. What hurt was the space between me and everyone else. Like wearing that hat had built an invisible wall around me. At dismissal, I walked out the back gate past the buses. A group of seniors stood near the fence smoking like they weren't about to get caught. One of them pointed, "Hey man, you missed the time machine back to 1969. The others laughed. I didn't. But I also didn't stop. Didn't flinch. Didn't touch the brim of the hat, even though my fingers ached to. I made it home and tossed my backpack on the floor. Sat on the edge of my bed. Stared at the ceiling. Then I grabbed my phone. The post was still up. Same hashtags. Same photo. Same flood of reactions. I scrolled. Buried in the middle was one comment from someone I didn't know, an account with no profile pic. It just said he wore it better. I stared at it for a long time. Didn't like it, didn't reply. But I read it again and again, because somehow that one comment held more truth than all the noise that came before it. That night, I sat at the kitchen table. Hat in front of me. Mom made tea and said nothing. Then she placed a photo album beside me. Opened it to a picture of Grandpa. Same hat, same face shape, same quiet. She smiled. He'd be proud. I didn't say anything. Didn't need to. Later, as I lay in bed, I thought about that hallway again. The moment the principal said his name. The way the laughter had evaporated like it was never there. And I thought maybe that's the point. Not to be understood by everyone, but to be heard even once in a room that had already made up its mind. I fell asleep with the hat on my nightstand. The brim facing the door. The light from the hallway touching the pin just enough to make it shine. I didn't expect anything from Mr. Ellison. He was one of those teachers who never smiled unless someone spelled revolutionary right on the first try. Dry voice, dry lessons, dry eyes. You'd think he was made of chalk himself. But the morning after the post went viral, he called my name before class started. Mr. Holloway, a moment please. I thought I was in trouble. Thought maybe someone had complained. that the hat was a disruption, that I'd be asked to leave it at home. But when I followed him into his office, he didn't say anything for a long moment. Just looked at me, then at the hat. Then, back at me again. Your grandfather, he said finally. James Holloway, Ia Drang. I blinked. Yes, sir. He nodded once, slowly, like each vertebra in his neck was trying to remember something. My uncle was there too, he said. Charles Ellison, Charlie Company, never came home. I sat down without being told. My voice came out quiet. I'm sorry. Mr. Ellison waved his hand, not dismissively, just tired. He was 22, wrote poems on C-ration wrappers. My mom kept them in a shoebox. I used to think they were just sad little scribbles. Then I read about LZ X-ray when I turned 16, started putting things together. He paused, then opened a drawer, pulled out a thin, worn folder. Inside were maps, old, faded, edges curled, but you could still see the names Chu Pong, Pleiku, Ia Drang. He pointed to a spot. Here, that's where your grandfather would have been dropped in. I leaned closer. The room suddenly felt too quiet, like the map itself was holding its breath. He traced a line with his finger. This ridge line. That's where they got ambushed. My uncle's unit tried to flank from the east, got cut off. He looked at me again. I thought about that battle a lot when I was your age. Didn't talk about it, though. No one wanted to hear it. They just wanted to forget. He closed the folder gently. Maybe that's why it matters that you wore the hat. I felt my throat tighten. I didn't think anyone would care. Ellison shrugged. Most won't, but some will. He stood and walked to the back shelf, pulled down a hardcover book spine, cracked pages marked up like scripture. He handed it to me. We were soldiers once and young. You should read chapter 6, he said. That's where it gets real. I held the book in my lap like it was sacred. Not because of what it said, but because of who had touched it before me. I looked up. Mr. Ellison stood by the window, now staring out at the flagpole. You know, he said softly, I used to think silence was the only kind of respect, that talking about what happened somehow cheapened it. He turned to me. But then you walked into my classroom with that hat. And for the first time in a long time, I remembered something I hadn't let myself feel. What's that? I asked. He smiled small and sad. Pride. He handed me a sticky note. An extension pass for next period. Then scribbled a number on the corner. Don't lose this. It's Reynolds' direct line. I stared. He asked me to reach out, Ellison said. Wants to speak to you. Something about a new initiative. A memorial project, maybe. He gave a small shrug. Or maybe he just wants to say your grandfather's name out loud. I left the office dazed. Not overwhelmed, not scared. Just opened. Like a door I didn't know was their had been cracked just wide enough to let the past walk through. That afternoon, I walked home the long way. Cut through the old park near the VFW hall, leaves crunching under my boots, the wind brushing the edges of the brim. I passed a man sitting alone on a bench watching squirrels climb an oak tree. He looked about 70, wore a black cap that said 101st Airborne in yellow stitching. He glanced up at me, then at the hat. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. He just raised 2 fingers to his brow and gave a quiet, respectful salute. I returned it without thinking. And in that moment, I knew this hat wasn't mine. Not really. I was just borrowing it the way you borrow a torch in the dark. You carry it long enough to keep the path lit for someone else. When I got home, I opened the book Ellison gave me. Chapter 6. 3 pages in, I had to stop. The words were too close. Too real. Too much like the things Grandpa never said. But I kept going, because I knew he would have wanted me to. He'd always said, know what came before you. It'll teach you what to stand for. That night, I pulled out an old photo album. The one with the picture of him standing on the tarmac, helmet in one hand, the hat in the other. I stared at it for a long time. And then I whispered something I hadn't said aloud since the funeral. Thank you. Not for dying, but for showing me how to carry something invisible, how to wear a memory like armor. The next morning, I pinned the sticky note from Mr. Ellison to the inside of my notebook, right next to the map he gave me. And I decided, if the principal wanted to talk, I'd be ready. Because some names, they deserve to be spoken again. The meeting wasn't what I expected. There was no giant desk, no dramatic speech, no lectures about dress code violations or appropriateness. Just Principal Reynolds sitting at a round conference table with a half-empty cup of coffee and a framed photo of his father in uniform propped beside his laptop. He waved me in like I wasn't a student but something else. A guest, maybe even a peer. Your grandfather, he said without small talk, was a name I hadn't heard in a long time. He tapped the desk with one finger. James Holloway, 1st Air Cavalry, Ia Drang. I nodded slowly. Yes, sir. He leaned back in his chair. My dad was 25th Infantry. Not the same battle, but same war. He came home broken. Didn't talk much. So when I saw that hat walk into Mr. Ellison's room, I felt something I haven't felt in decades. I didn't know what to say. My hands stayed folded on my lap. Reynolds looked at me, not stern, not distant, just present. You reminded me, he said, and more importantly, you reminded them. I swallowed. What happens now? He cracked a small smile. That's what I wanted to ask you. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and slid it across the table. Typed at the top, Veterans Day Assembly, Memorial Segment Proposal. Underneath it, keynote speaker, student representative, My Holloway, confirmed second slot, James Holloway, honored posthumously. I stared at it. You want me to speak? He nodded. Only if you want to. I'm not sure I know what to say. Reynolds shrugged. Sometimes silence speaks plenty, but sometimes the story needs to be said out loud. He paused, then added, most kids today know wars from Call of Duty and classroom slides. They don't know names. They don't know stories. You changed that, even if just for a moment. The day of the assembly came faster than I expected. The gym was packed. Folding chairs filled the floor, bleachers packed with students whispering, teachers adjusting their clipboards, the sound of microphone checks and gym lights buzzing overhead. I stood behind the curtain, holding the hat in both hands. I wasn't wearing it. Not yet. Captain Jenkins, the Army recruiter assigned to the school, gave the first speech. It was fine, official, polished, a mix of duty sacrifice and PowerPoint slides. The students clapped politely. Then Principal Reynolds stepped to the mic. His voice was quiet at first. I'm not going to talk about war today, he began. I want to talk about remembrance. That got their attention. He took a breath. Most of you probably don't know the name James Holloway, but one of you does. He turned slightly, looked at me waiting backstage, and then he said, today we honor a soldier from our own community, one who served in the Ia Drang Valley, one of the first major battles of the Vietnam War. A man who lived quietly, who passed away 1 year ago this week. The room stilled. Students leaned forward. And then he finished, and who was remembered by a grandson who chose to wear his name when others had forgotten. He stepped back and waved me forward. The walk to the podium felt like the longest 30 feet of my life. I carried the hat in both hands. Each step I could feel the weight of it, not just fabric, but story. I looked out at hundreds of faces. Then I spoke. My name is Mai Holloway. My grandfather was Sergeant James Holloway. He wore this hat in 1965 in a place called the Ia Drang Valley. I wore it last week to school. Some people laughed. That's okay. They didn't know the story. I lifted the hat slightly, like showing them wasn't about the hat. It was about what it carried. He didn't talk about the war, but he left this with me. Not as a symbol of violence, but of quiet strength, of survival, of dignity. I glanced at Principal Reynolds. He once told me, don't wear it for show. Wear it when it matters. I think today matters. I finished with this. Some memories don't fit into textbooks. Some names don't make the headlines, but they deserve to be spoken. And sometimes they need someone young to carry them forward. I placed the hat on the podium, then stepped back. The crowd didn't cheer. They rose. Quietly. In full. Even Troy. Even the girl who posted the photo. Even Mr. Ellison, who stood with his hand over his heart, his eyes glassy. The applause came after. Not thunderous. Not wild. Just honest. Afterward, students lined up. One boy pressed a folded picture into my hand. My great-uncle served too? He died before I was born. No one ever talks about him. A girl handed me a small note. You made me think about my dad. He still wears his Navy pin. I used to be embarrassed. I'm not now. A teacher I didn't even recognize said my mom served in Korea. No one ever asked about her. Until now. The final person in line was Captain Jenkins. He looked at the hat, then at me. That took guts, he said. I smiled. He had more. He nodded once. Keep carrying it. I will. I walked home that day with the hat in my hands, the wind brushing past me like memory itself. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was trying to prove anything. I just felt proud. The Monday after the assembly felt different. The halls still buzzed, but not the same way. People moved quieter, slower. They didn't bump into me like before. They didn't whisper when I walked by. They didn't mock the hat. Because now they knew the hat. I didn't wear it again, not in school. Instead, I placed it in a glass box at home above the bookshelf. Next to Grandpa's old medals and a black and white photo of him standing beside a Huey boots caked in red dirt. That box became a kind of lighthouse. A reminder, a pulse. But not an altar. Because he wasn't gone. Not really. Mr. Ellison started a new unit that week. Instead of textbook slides, he handed out printed letters from real soldiers. Instead of bullet points, he played crackly audio from Vietnam radio calls. Instead of multiple choice, he asked, "What does remembrance look like to you?" No one laughed. No one rolled their eyes. Because somehow, the air in that classroom had shifted just a little. On Thursday, a box showed up at our door. No return address. Inside a faded MRE, 2 war ribbons, and a short note. Your grandfather saved my life. Ia Drang, 65. I was Private Lyles. I owed him a letter. Took me 58 years. Hope you don't mind it's late? I didn't. That weekend, Mom and I drove 2 towns over to visit the VA office. She brought his records. I brought the glass box. A volunteer scanned the medals, nodding slowly, his fingers tracing each edge like they were braille from a sacred book. When we left, they gave us a certificate. In honor of Sergeant James Holloway for valor, service, and legacy. It wasn't flashy. Just parchment black ink, a gold seal. But when I held it, I felt like it weighed as much as the man himself. At school, things kept shifting. Troy never apologized. Not directly. But one day in gym, he passed me a basketball, made eye contact, and said, "Nice pass, man." That was enough. For now, Lexi came by my locker with a printout of a poem. Said she found it in an old anthology, written by a Vietnam vet, titled, "Things I Didn't Say at the Airport." She looked sheepish, made me cry. I nodded. Me too. Even the girl who posted the meme sent a message. Just 3 words, I was wrong. That was it. But it meant something. Because people don't always change overnight. But sometimes, they begin. 2 weeks later, Principal Reynolds asked if I wanted to join the committee planning next year's assembly. Said they were thinking of adding a student-led segment. Maybe a table of remembrance, he suggested. Maybe you curate it. I said yes. Not because I liked committees. But because I liked the idea that Grandpa's story might light someone else's match. Near Thanksgiving, Mr. Ellison gave me a book. Wrapped in brown paper, no ribbon. Inside was a note. History only matters when someone cares enough to carry it. You're doing that now. Don't stop. I flipped to the front page. Inside, scribbled in pencil. James Holloway, March 73, property of 1st Cav. It was his. Somehow, Ellison had tracked down Grandpa's original copy. That night, I sat in my room, light dim, book open. The pages smelled like time. Felt like gravity. And for the first time in weeks, I let myself cry. Not out of sadness. but because I finally understood the shape of what I was holding. It wasn't a burden. It wasn't just history. It was a legacy passed like a quiet torch, not to burn, but to illuminate. Not to make noise, but to keep something sacred from being swallowed by silence. Sometimes people think being young means you don't understand sacrifice. But maybe youth is when we feel it most. Because we're still raw, still listening, still brave enough to ask, who were they? And why haven't we said their names out loud yet? A month later, I gave a presentation in front of the school board. Wore a plain shirt, no hat. But I brought the glass box. Set it gently on the table, like placing a folded flag. I read from the note I owed him a letter. Took me 58 years. And then I said, I think all of us owe someone a letter. Maybe now's the time to write it. The vote passed unanimously. Next, Veterans Day. The school gym will have a wall of names, not just famous generals or presidents, but locals, neighbors, grandfathers, like mine. And on that wall, in clean white lettering under a soft light, it will say, Sergeant James Holloway, 1st Cavalry, Ia Drang, Vietnam. And next to it, a photo of me wearing the hat. 1 year later, November 11th, the gym smelled like fresh paint and folded programs. The wall of remembrance stood tall on the east end, framed by American flags and the soft glow of LED spotlights. It wasn't marble. It wasn't fancy. But it was real. And every name on it mattered to someone. I stood at the edge of the crowd holding the hat in my hands again. Not to wear it. Just to feel its weight. That fabric had touched jungle wind, monsoon rain, blood, and bone. It had absorbed fear and faith and somehow made it back to me. Today I didn't need it to feel strong. I already was. They called my name My Holloway, and I walked to the podium like it was a promise kept. This time no one laughed. This time no one needed an explanation. Because the story had already begun a year ago with one small decision. One memory worn on the head that cracked open 100 hearts. I looked out at the rows of students and parents and veterans, their faces caught between sunlight and solemnity. Then I began. A year ago, I wore this hat to school. I wore it because my grandfather once wore it in war. I wore it because I missed him. Because I didn't know how to say goodbye. Because no one had said his name in public since his funeral. And maybe selfishly, I wanted to see if anyone else remembered. What I didn't expect was that they did. Or that they would. Or that by wearing a memory, I'd help others find their own. I turned toward the wall behind me. Dozens of names newly etched in vinyl. Some with flowers underneath. Some with flags. Some with nothing but silence. I reached out and touched his name, James Holloway, gently, like waking a sleeping giant. Legacy isn't just medals or battles or what ends up in a history book. It's how we remember, how we tell the truth. Even when the truth is messy or forgotten or buried under time and noise and memes. I held up the hat one last time. And sometimes remembrance is simple. Sometimes it's just a hat, worn by someone who still believes the past deserves to stand up and be seen. I stepped back and they played taps. The notes echoed like wind across a quiet battlefield. I closed my eyes. For the first time, I didn't picture him dying. I pictured him young, alive, smiling beneath jungle sun, holding this very hat, saying, "Don't forget who you are." After the ceremony, people came again. Fewer this time, but deeper. A woman who'd never spoken in school said her mother was a nurse in Da Nang. A janitor handed me a dog tag he'd worn around his neck for 40 years, not his own. Said, "You reminded me it still matters." I placed the hat back in its glass case that night, sealed it, and wrote in black ink, "Worn with honor, remembered with love." Then I left a note beside it, for the next person who might need to carry something forward. Because legacy isn't just inherited. It's chosen. I still walk the halls of that school. Still get nods from teachers. Still hear whispers. But they're different now. Not laughter. Just stories. Ripples. Someone brought in their grandfather's old patch to show Mr. Ellison. Someone painted a small mural in the art hall, a field of boots and helmets under a golden sky. Someone else just started wearing their great-uncle's name on a bracelet. Little things. But they spread. I'm not trying to be a hero. I'm not trying to make anyone cry. I'm just a kid who wore a hat one day. And saw the world tilt just slightly in the right direction. If you're hearing this, maybe you have something like that too. A box in the attic. A photo you've never framed. A name you haven't said in years. It's not too late. Pick it up. Dust it off. Tell their story. Even if your voice shakes. Even if no one listens the first time. Because someone will. And that's how it begins. We don't carry legacy because we have to. We carry it because it's how we say, you mattered. So today on Veterans Day, look around. Say their names. Not just the famous ones, but the quiet ones. The ones who came home different. Or didn't come home at all. The ones who taught you something, even if it was just how to stand up straight when someone else couldn't. And if you've got a hat in your closet, maybe it's time to wear it. Thank you for listening. If this story made you remember someone, share it with someone else. Because memory only matters when it's passed on. And somewhere, someone's waiting to hear that their story wasn't forgotten.